It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest, on behalf of Ben Taatjes and myself. We are so glad that you're joining us here today. You know, so many people, they retire without a plan. They think that they can just kind of shut off the switch, so to speak, where they eliminate work out of the life equation, and all of a sudden, everything is going to come into fulfillment, and their life is actually going to get better in many ways. And in some respects, it does, but in many ways, it leaves people feeling a little empty and off. Well, we are doing another special look back, throwback episode of Retire Repurposed. Today, we are going way back into the archives, all the way back to episode number 5, which was recorded in 2020 in the height of the pandemic. This is a pivotal conversation that we recorded when the world was grappling with literally unprecedented isolation. Ben's insights on building social connections during retirement proved especially valuable during that pandemic, and these strategies remain essential today. As we prepare for the launch of Repurposed version 2, this episode reminds us that while circumstances change, the fundamental needs of retirees remain constant. Enjoy this episode. All right, Ben, today we're talking about COVID-19, kind of this new world that we're living in and what retirees are dealing with, especially with respect to happiness. And this is going to kind of piggyback off of last week's show where we talked about isolation. I think before we get into the crux of this show, let's kind of do a little review of last week's show and talk about why isolation is so bad for people, but specifically retirees in general.
Well, I think for all people, we find our true meaning of and our best way to live a fulfilled life is by serving others.
Yeah.
And if we're isolated, that's pretty hard to do, right? if it's not even saying our focus becomes on ourselves, but when we're isolated, it becomes very hard to add value to other people's lives, and that's what makes it so difficult.
Yeah, we live in this world where we are being mandated, encouraged to stay at home, stay away from people, isolate. Then you inject in all the fear that's going into that, so it's kind of like a snowball effect. And again, you throw into the fact that COVID-19 is probably a higher risk for older folks, retirees. I mean, this is kind of like the perfect storm, which is attacking really at the crux of really what being repurposed is all about. I mean, it really hits on many of these factors.
Yeah, it is, and that's what makes this message so important right now. That's what makes just listening to this and trying to change the narrative a little bit in your own life so important right now.
Yeah, you talked about kind of a happiness pyramid last week. I think that's a really great illustration. Why don't you kind of just tell folks more about that, or at least if you missed last week's show, what that's all about?
Yeah, I think when we look at the easiest, quickest way to feel at least happy or to have some pleasure would be near the bottom of this pyramid, which would be to just entertainment. Mm-hmm. So if you want to look at a baseball game, right, that would be I'm just watching baseball on TV. Right, that's the easiest way. You just turn on the TV. I can watch baseball. It's some low-level enjoyment there. You can just watch it and be entertained. Then up the next level in the pyramid is what we call engagement, and that is really to be part of, to engage in that sport. And in the baseball analogy, that would mean I'm actually going out and playing baseball. Maybe I'm throwing the baseball around. I'm actually playing in the game. And the very top of the pyramid is where we talk about meaning and purpose and making a difference in somebody else's life. And that would be coaching baseball, when you're actually able to show someone else, impact someone else in a way that makes a difference in their world. It then is kind of at the pinnacle, the actual absolute top of that happiness pyramid.
One of the things we're going to address in this week's show is really the importance of social connections, which, by the way, is one of the major legs of Repurposed. They all kind of work together. Again, I'll just kind of give you a little insight as to kind of what these legs are all about. It's really a mindset, which we've talked about on the show before. It's really understanding your purpose or your repurpose. It's really identifying relationships and, again, social connections, which we'll talk about, physical health, and also legacy. And again, we're going to kind of really address the social side to it. But I think when it comes to this pyramid that you just described, the X factor is that jump from level 2 to level 3. Because I can watch and I can even play a sport. I can go play golf by myself. I can watch it on television. But now coaching golf to my grandchildren or other folks, that's where you bring in the people aspect. Yeah. And again, that's what this is really all about. And again, going back to kind of what's happening in the world, man, everything in our world right now is fighting against every major leg of living a repurposed retirement for a retiree. And I think that's why this is making it so much more deadly, especially because it's really chomping at the bit for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and that's the worst part, right, for people sitting at home today and having to be isolated, is it takes away the people impact that you can have to some extent. However, we want to change the narrative a little bit and show people, and I think our last couple shows have done a good job of that, just say, yeah, you can still impact others around you. It just can't look the same way in this environment.
Right. We kind of talked about how to name this show. We even talked about, it's kind of like a house of cards. What's happening in the world has really exposed a lot of flaws, I think, in a lot of our lives, and maybe how we have oriented happiness. And again, we'll go into kind of how we define that, but just take us through kind of this formula. We created a talking point here about the formula to happiness is really being under attack, or it's broken. And again, what's happening in the world has exposed a lot of that. Walk us through that.
Well, in society today, a lot of times people look at the formula being, first I get success and then I'm happy. And I think that's kind of backwards. In fact, I read a really good book a while back by Sean Aker, The Happiness Advantage. And in that book, and I'll read you this section because I think it's really interesting, he says, we think, if I get that raise or I hit that next sales target, I'll be happy. If I can just get a good grade, I'll be happy. If I lose 5 pounds, I'll be happy, and so on and so on. Success first, happiness second. And what he's getting at there is that as we really find that next thing that we find success in, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And later on, he goes on to say, but with every victory, our goalposts of success keep getting pushed further and further out, so that happiness gets pushed over the horizon. If success is our ability, and that's helping us find happiness, you'll never reach it, right? Because when success is really the goal, it's a moving target. Once you attain something, you're looking for something else. And I think when we based on society about if we're happy, if we're content with either what we have or what we're getting, even what we're earning, I think that's where that's where it's broken. And I think sometimes in this environment where, quite honestly, having success and seeing that it gets more difficult, right? And if we're trying to motivate towards change, it gets more difficult in this world because you're being told stay home and kind of just maintain.
Yeah, I think that's probably a struggle. It has to be for retirees anyway, because they've spent their entire life building, growing. It's hard not to, in some capacity, kind of buy into that mindset that the next promotion or the next pay step or whatever that looks like, or a bigger house, is kind of the way of the land. It's kind of just the American way. And when it comes to retirement, now all of a sudden we have to kind of back away from that. You've mentioned the shark fin example, even like just building wealth, for example. Now we have to change our mindset where that can't be the is-all end-all goal, because that's not the mode you're in anymore.
Right. At that mode, you're looking at income, and you're trying to, if you're doing it properly, you use and spend those assets on the way down. Right. So growth isn't as much of a an issue there as so is the income. Right. Look at how the ancient Greeks describe happiness, Jared. So they say that the joy you feel, the happiness is described as the joy you feel when drawing closer to your potential. Okay, and why I think that's an interesting quote or an interesting look at what happiness is if you are not growing, and a lot of retirees fall into that again, and if you're kind of stagnant, or certainly in this time when it's really hard to go out and grow and to do things, I think that's part of the reason people are struggling so much in this isolation mode, because it took not only our ability to serve others away, it took our ability to grow somewhat away, and it's not gone, but we've got to be very intentional about keeping those things in our life.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Another thing we want to really dissect in this podcast is the mentality in third world countries. And this is kind of something that you've been able to experience in your own life. You've been to Haiti many times. We've got, again, a couple of bullet points we want to go through here. But as we were building the show and we were kind of building these, you've been able to see all of these at work. Get us started going down that road.
Well, yeah, I had the opportunity to travel to Haiti probably about 7 or 8 times now. Almost every year I've been down to volunteer with a local nonprofit there. And something that has struck me from the very beginning was just how in a world where they have nothing, quite honestly, from our viewpoint,
right.
The smiles are huge, and the people there seem almost happier than many of the people I run into here. There's one nanny, I'll tell you a quick story about her that we've gotten to know a little bit in our time there. And I was able to go down with some volunteers, and we got to spend time looking at her home. In fact, I was able to have a Sunday meal in this Haitian woman's home with my friend Jamie. And I will never forget just how proud she was and how happy she was to be in that place with us, a couple of Americans. And we ate in this, literally it was a hut. And it was in a floodplain, which it was a good thing it hadn't rained, because I also have pictures of this this lady's house basically underwater. And here she is, smiling ear to ear with how happy she is, because we're there, and because she felt like she had everything she needed. And I think in third world countries, they have, I think, 3 keys that allow them to be maybe more, at least somewhat more happy than what we are many times, right? Yeah. First one is they have optimism. And I think in a world like Haiti, in a country like Haiti, in that world when you're stuck, there still is this element of optimism there, where they're looking at their situation, and yes, it can get better. I can remember one time bringing some gifts down on one of our trips, some cash down to give to this particular nanny, and she was going to go out and buy mattresses for the first time in her new home. And I remember her showing me the picture of these mattresses that she found, and she said, "They're real good, very few bugs."
It's not a raving review. But.
It isn't, is it? No. But you know what? It was better than what she had.
Right.
And the optimism was there in that, these mattresses I will sleep on far better than what I was before. So there's a level of optimism there.
Yeah, I think just with the craziness of the news cycle, with all the headlines, with the bombardment of social media and all these things that we're connected to, it's hard. I would say perhaps it's harder to have that optimistic view. Certainly not impossible, and that's not what I'm suggesting. But I think it's something that we have to probably all, in some respects, fight, because fear and isolation are going to want to keep you kind of locked into the darkness, so to speak. And I think there's a real, you could even call it a spiritual battle of light versus dark, where the enemy wants to beat you down, throw you in the closet, shut the lights off, and that's where you sit. And that's the opposite of optimism. And I think that's something that's very real, probably for a lot of retirees right now, is fighting through that.
Yep. And for those retirees and everybody listening, flip the light on. We know where the light comes from. Yeah. Get the light on, and really let's beat the enemy in this thing. And I agree with you. I think it is so difficult, but we know how to come out the other side.
Would you even say the fact that when it comes to third world countries, when you have less, perhaps it might be easier to be optimistic because we kind of get used to everything going so well. And again, that's kind of the way it's been really for a fairly long time, at least a decade plus, where we've haven't had a major hiccup, and so now here we are, and we're waking up and the world got turned upside down in the matter of 48 hours about a month ago, and we've been trying to kind of combat it since. I've mentioned this not on the show, but I'm fascinated with the Amish people, and I've said this. My brother and sister-in-law live in a part of South Dakota where there's a lot of Amish people that come to visit, and I've gotten to interact with them, and they're just kind of fascinating folks. And so I've read some books on them and articles, and just kind of see why and how they live. And one thing I notice is that the amount of depression within the Amish is extremely low. I mean, like major factors lower than the average Americans. And you look at their life, and I mean, their life is so simple. They don't have to choose they pretty much make their clothes. They pretty much interact and marry people within, a 20-mile radius. And they don't have a lot of choices. And so when things get really bad, air quotes, it doesn't really hit them as hard. You think that there's something to that?
I think there is, and I think it's the exact opposite of how we're living in America today.
Right.
And I think even back to our opening comments on how we find happiness. It's through success. It's through growth. It's through getting better all the time. And there's nothing wrong with growing. We want that, but when
growing towards the right thing,
to the right thing is what we're after,
and the right avenue. And I think that goes back to last week, where that avenue. The antidote to isolation is the avenue of serving others, and that's got to be the right focus when it comes to this mindset. I think you hit it on the head. The second one is what?
Deep social connection. So one thing I've noticed in traveling to Haiti, and I know if you've ever been to a third world country, their social connection is strong. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it's because we rely on one another so much when things are hard, and it's a hard place to live. There's times where you're traveling through Haiti, and it's like, I know there's a guy who can help me with fixing my tire, and I know he lives in the next two huts down or the next community over. So we know everyone, and everybody knows everyone. There's just a strong sense of community, and I think for retirees specifically, it's something we've talked about a lot. That social connection, we can lose that in retirement if we're not careful. And certainly in this environment, it's hard not to lose social connection because they're saying don't socially connect.
Right. We've talked about, or we haven't really talked about this yet, but there's many different layers of social connections. There's big ones, there's community, all the way down to spousal connections. Which ones do you think are the most under attack right now, and the ones that retirees need to be the most aware of that are getting basically shredded now because of isolation and COVID-19?
Well, you look out to the biggest outside circle there is in our model. You're looking at community. Yeah, community, and that's we're created to live in community with one another, and that element is really hard to maintain in this. So gets down from there to family, and then eventually we hit spousal, and even under that we hit spiritual, and even that's under attack right now. I think as we get isolated, as we feel fear, let's not forget at the base of this really connection needs to be a connection with God.
By the way, just a little heads up for you folks listening. In a couple of minutes, we're going to give you some pointers on how you can still kind of grow and maintain your social connections even amidst all this quarantine and isolation. So we're going to get to that here at the end of the show. So we talked about optimism, social connections. What's the third thing that we've seen or you've seen in third world countries that have helped them kind of be happy in times that maybe aren't so great?
Well, I think it's a faith in God, and a really strong faith in God that comes from reliance. And, we've talked about this a little bit off air, but, personally, I know in my faith journey has gotten much closer. I've gotten so much closer to the Lord in the last few weeks to a month. In fact, I was having a Bible study with a friend of mine happens to be the same guy I traveled to Haiti with, but this goes back earlier in the year, January timeframe.
Before all this
happened. Yeah. And I can remember mentioning to him, I feel further away from God than I have in a long time. And I look back on that, and the why behind it is I tend to get reliant on myself then, right? I've done, the business is growing and everything's going well, family's good. Well, who needs God then? Right? And it's easy for us to look to ourselves to look what we've done, and we've created all this. Well, the problem is when those things go away, we right away run back. And I think that's what I see in people in Haiti is they are reliant on God
all the time.
All the time.
Right.
And you hear this saying where in Creole they say, only God knows. And you ask them a question, well, God knows. And they rely on him, and they say, only God knows what's next. And when you become that reliant and you move closer to God, I think that's what they have that many of us don't, me being guilty of that as well at times, because, again, I become self-reliant.
Yeah. Well, just take a look at what happened in the world in the last month. I mean, this literally happened within like a day. I don't know if we can backtrack back to early March when kind of COVID-19 started hitting the scene. And for the most part, it was just kind of a thing we were seeing on the news. And then within like 2 hours, I mean, it went from they emptied stadiums, they emptied NBA games, and literally within 2 hours canceled everything. I mean, the Final Four, everything. And you can't go to stores, you can't go to restaurants, can't go to bars, schools are let out. I mean, literally everything has been, that's an overstatement. Literally a lot of things that take up a lot of our time, energy, attention, completely stripped away. Is it possible that, there is an underlying spiritual lesson that we could all learn, not just a retiree, to say, wow, now what? Because again, to somebody living in a poor country who has very little, that's what their life is like all the time. That's a tough mirror to look into.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but
I
will tell you, I've swallowed it, and I've sat here like thinking, woe is me. Woe is me. I can't get food as easy as we could. We can't actually go out and have somebody else make our food for us.
Right.
Woe is me. Yeah. And I don't want to. There's a lot coming out, and this is impacting a lot of people's businesses. It's impacting people a lot greater than for many of us locally here.
Sure.
But you got to remember, we do still have it very good living in this country right now, and we have a lot to look forward to.
Well, again, a retiree by default is crushing it if you look at it from a worldwide standpoint.
Just living in this country, you have the ability to choose not to work.
Right?
Think about that.
Yeah.
To have the wealth to say, I'm not going to work to create $1 to spend on food today. That is a gift in and of itself. So, I think we need to have some perspective there. And I think as we go through this thing, we're not out of the woods yet. And as we continue to move forward, we got to have that proper perspective. And I think rooting down in our faith and realizing that that's where our strength should come from. And maybe when we get back to normal, which things won't be exactly the same, but when we get back there, maybe we look at things just a little bit different. Right.
Yeah, and I think that would be a great lesson we could all take away. We've got about a minute left. Ben, walk us through some ways that we can kind of maintain or at least grow our social connections even in the midst of this quarantine. Is there a way we can do that?
Well, I think we need to understand, for retirees, for all of us, how to use some of the new technology to allow us to see somebody's face when we talk to them. And I think FaceTime works great. I actually had a FaceTime conversation, believe it or not, with my plumber the other day. And he called me. And you know what? We had been working on some stuff up at our cabin. He helped me out with it. And then he called me the next day. I was like, Jim, I'm not doing any plumbing now. And he just said, well,
I just want to talk to somebody.
I just want to talk to somebody. And I'm like, well, it was kind of enjoyable. I saw his face, and that was good.
Right.
So Google Hangouts or Zoom, other things, you can learn how to use that. Make a list of friends and family members you'd like to talk to, and then start talking to them and making sure you're staying connected with them, and even praying for those individuals, for sure.
Yep.
The next one is, if you've had a friend who struggles with either OCD, anxiety, any mental illness, now's the time you absolutely have to reach out to them. If you know of that person, just reach out to them and make a difference.
The last one's kind of for kids, but it can go for retirees as well.
Well, one thing that a lot of people miss is playing games with other people.
Yeah,
right.
I miss playing games with other people.
Yeah, and I think just getting getting online and being able to join a group of people that are doing, whether it be chess or something. I mean, you can still build those connections with people through the technology we have today.
Well, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Retire Repurposed. For more information, check us out online at retirerepurposed.com. We'll see you next time.